your choice?
Like how I got into like the world of nutrition.
Yeah.
So, um, there's a lot of reasons. So when I was a freshman in college, I went off and decided to be like a business major. And I went to Florida Atlantic my freshman year because my sisters went there. And I wanted to be different than all of my friends in high school that were going to like FSU and UCF and whatever. I grew up in Florida. So it was all the Florida schools. So
Mm.
I went to FAU and I studied business and I was just kind of there, like lonely, didn't have friends because I didn't know anybody there. And was pretty bored with like the business classes I was taking. And full transparency, to be honest, like I haven't really shared this part of my story. I used to always say like it was just because I played soccer and I was really into like the wellness, but I'm starting to be more open about this story. But I played varsity soccer like most of my time in high school, and soccer is like the sport I grew up playing. And I was not like amazing, you know, like I wasn't like FSU level amazing, but I probably could have got like a D2 level, like, you know, scholarship or something, or played at a D2 level. And my senior year of high school, I was kind of dealing with a little bit of like an eating disorder. And I
Mm.
had focused a lot more on that part of my life. It kind of overcame my life. And it really negatively impacted my soccer, right? Obviously, like I was not fueling my body. And so I was really like declining in my performance. And when I was a freshman in college, it obviously was like, it got way worse because I was there alone. I didn't have support. Like I was just like really pretty deep into like a pretty bad eating disorder. And I just got to a point where like I was like, man, I miss playing soccer, you know, like I didn't go and play in college. And I started researching like nutrition stuff. Like I was really tired of feeling the way that I was feeling. I was like depressed and had no energy and had a really poor like, you know, self-image. And so I started researching like nutrition stuff and on my own, and I started learning about like what I was doing to my body, you know, being that I was like not eating, and also just to my mental health. So I started like reading more and more, and I was like learning about how sports nutrition was a thing. Like this was over 10 years ago, so it was very new. Like there wasn't a whole lot in the sports nutrition realm yet at that time. And so I was like, you know what, I kind of want to pursue this. Like it actually helped me like get out of my eating disorder. Like I was going to therapy and doing all of these things as well, but um it helped me like learning the impact I was having on my body by like not eating enough and stuff. I like it really helped me kind of like see things differently and realize like the impact I was having on my health. And so it helped me get out of that. And so I was like, you know what? Like, I want to study this. I want to learn this. And I want to like help people also see this light, other people. And so I started researching sports nutrition programs. And at the time, only Florida State and the University of Florida had, and again, I needed to be in state because of like tuition, but they were the only programs in Florida that had like where you could become a registered dietitian, but also specialize in sport. And so I chose Florida State, transferred there, went there for my junior and senior year of college, did all the coursework that I needed to do to then apply for a dietetic internship. And then just kind of did that with my master's at Florida State. And that's kind of what took me down the road of like the road I'm on now. Florida State had a really, the sports nutrition program, because of Amanda Carlson, had a
Mm.
really good relationship with Exos in
Yeah.
Pensacola, Florida. And so any sports nutrition intern who needed sports nutrition hours would go to Exos in Florida and do their rotation hours. And that's kind of how I ended up there. So, and that like took me to where I am today. So that's cool.
Awesome. And like so many. So first thing I would like to ask, just for clarity for me and in general, uh, a nutritionist versus a dietitian, is there a difference? Are they interchangeable? If so, like what is the difference? Because I hear, I don't know if there's clarity around those two terms.
Yeah, so dietitians don't really love being called nutritionists because there is a quite a difference. Like I don't care that much, but like it's probably in a more exaggerated way, it's kind of like calling a doctor a nurse because nurses
Okay.
totally respect them, doctors very respected, a field, but education to get them to those positions are very different, right? Like
Okay.
nursing schools, 2 years or so. Doctor, you're in school for a lot longer. So a dietitian, the difference is like nutritionist is usually somebody who can like get certified through, some weekend courses or some online courses or things like that. They maybe do a few hours of coursework and then they
Mm.
get certified as a nutritionist. Whereas a dietitian, now we have to have a master's degree. You have to do 1,200 hours of a dietetic internship. And this is in it's kind of like a mini medical residency. You're not as intense, but you're doing, 10 to 12 weeks in a hospital. So I spent time in an ICU and, cardio floors, like in a hospital, actually working with like, medical staff. You do outpatient, you do community nutrition, you do food service where you're working in kitchens. So you have to do certain amount of hours in these areas. And then you can sit for a nationally recognized board exam. So you have to sit for an exam, pass the exam, and that's what how you get credentialed to be a registered dietitian. And then beyond that, in order to keep that credential, you have to do continuing education. So we have to keep
Mm.
up with research, go to conferences, do all the things to make sure we're getting the credits so that we can maintain our credentials. And then in some states, there's also licensing requirements where you have to be licensed to be able to practice and do nutrition in those states. So like Florida is a licensed state. Dietitians who work in Florida, if they're, working with people who have medical conditions or doing any sort of meal planning or doing any sort of what is called medical nutrition therapy, they have to be licensed to do that. So a nutritionist could not do the same things that a dietitian could do in the state of Florida, as an example. So it all comes down to the education and the need for continuing education, and also just the type of education that we get. Like we learn about medical conditions, food medication interactions. We learn like therapy techniques, like as in like motivational interviewing and cognitive behavioral therapy and all of these things. Whereas if you're a nutritionist, you sat down for a few hours, probably got some great information, but you don't have as deep of a knowledge base in like foundational like medical nutrition that we get in our schooling. And not to discount nutrition, there's great nutritionists out there. I'm not like, don't want to like discount anything that they do, but there is a huge difference in the amount of knowledge and education between the two.
And that's fair. And I think it's good because I've heard the words kind of used, and I'm like, man, what is the difference? But I think your analogy was great between like doctors and nurses. I think all of a sudden I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Um, so one, thank you for sharing your story, by the way. And if it's something new that you're doing and sharing your story, like I appreciate you doing it because I'm sure that it's tough. I will say though, it's something that I don't understand, right? Like, and so I'm just curious. And again, if you're like open to sharing, like eating disorders and kind of the mechanisms of them, if you could like describe or explain, or like I said, wow, I know of them, but I wouldn't know like where it comes from or anything. Is that something that you'd be able to like describe or share or?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like there's so many definitions of eating disorders, like different types and things like that, and everybody's experience or how it happens or manifests is different. I will say, like in the dietetic and nutrition world, there's a huge percentage of individuals who have come from eating disorder backgrounds or are currently still dealing with those, and it's probably not talked enough or talked about enough in our world, because it can create bias in some of the stuff that we do. So I think just like putting that awareness out there that a lot of us come from that. Not everybody, definitely not everybody, but there is a lot of that. But eating disorders, I mean, for me, it was just like I think the world that I grew up in, which I think nowadays it's starting to take a shift where people are less worried about the way that they look, and more worried
Mm,
about mental health and how they feel, things like that. But growing up for me, it was all like the look in social media. Well, I guess I didn't really have social media growing up as much, but like in magazines and things like that, like
Yeah,
you would
yeah.
see just skinny women, like tall, skinny women who, just looked a very specific way. There wasn't a whole lot of like diversity in what people looked like. And then in advertising and things like that. And so I think I just, like how I grew up, like middle class, somewhat privileged, like I think it's just very common that me and my friends, like we just thought we needed to like look a certain way. And so it actually started because me and two of my friends in high school decided that we were going to like do like a weight loss competition, and which is so stupid. I have no idea, we're like 17-year-old girls. I have no idea whose idea it was, whatever. But we basically were just like, let's do this. And then I just got like super fixated on it. And a lot of it has to
Mm,
do, I mean, eating disorders are so like psychology based. There's a lot that mentally is driving that. People's like upbringing drives that. A lot of it has to do with like control. If you can't
mm,
have a lot of control in your outside life, then you can control, like the calories that you take in or the amount of exercise that you have. And again, I'm not an expert in the eating disorder realm at all, so I can't like define them perfectly, but I just know they all manifest in different ways. Like for me, I was over exercising, I was under eating, I was just like, in some cases I would like binge eat and purge or just completely not eat. I remember in my freshman year in college, I lost my menstrual cycle for like a year and a half. That's usually like the cardinal sign that like you
yeah,
are not eating enough as a woman if you lose your menstrual cycle, because that's the first thing your body's going to sacrifice is the ability to reproduce when your body's like, hey, I can't even take care of this body. I'm not going to try to take care of another. So, yeah, I mean, it just, that's how that was my story. And then, playing soccer and just like completely like just sucking. I mean, I got benched. I was horrible because I wasn't eating enough. So I couldn't actually perform. That's where I was just started like connecting dots where I was like, oh, like fueling my body is actually really important to being able to like
yeah.
perform the sport. But beyond that, just being like happy, being able to think clearly, it was just a huge like learning experience for me.
Do you play any soccer anymore?
I still play soccer, yeah. Like I play indoor and I play in a women's league. It's
That's
something,
awesome.
it's just like it's like therapy for me to go play soccer. So
So, the information helped you a lot, right? Like you had mentioned that, like the information helped. I think we're in an age where like there's maybe too much information and maybe not enough like tangible strategy. Um, at the time that you were like, all right, I'm learning all this, were there any like strategies that you were like, all right, if I immediately, or was it like, I'm just going to start eating or eating better, or like what became the next step for you?
yeah, well, I was seeing a therapist too. I got to a point
Okay.
where I went to my parents and I was like, listen, I feel like I have I was aware that I had a problem and that I needed like additional, like just mental health support with it. So that helped a lot. That therapist, a lot of my, I guess stuff during that time of my life, a lot of things happened. So I think it was the one thing I could control. Like I had
Mm,
friends pass away in car accidents and multiple, and it was just like I was, you know, 18, 19 years old. And it was just like a lot of deep stuff that, you're not typically dealing with at that age. And when I was going to therapy, my therapist just helped me kind of realize like that that's how I was coping with things and taught me like better coping mechanisms and taught me how to, control anxiety and, a lot of just like breathing techniques and things like that that I still use to this day. But um you said like what was the next thing? Like I think just that was helpful to just kind of see that like I needed to learn like different coping mechanisms, but also just learning like I don't know, just starting to eat like healthy, right? Like I was
mhm.
starting to be less strict with myself about like looking at foods as good or bad. Like during that time, like I thought like I would not allow myself to eat bagels. I would not allow myself to eat pizza. I would not allow myself to eat donuts because those were just like what in the eating disorder world we call like triggering foods or like, so I just like wouldn't let myself. I was super, super strict. And as I started like kind of healing through that journey, I was like letting myself, bagels were like a tradition in my household growing up. We would have Saturday morning bagels. It was like
Mhm.
a thing. My parents would go buy fresh bagels. We'd have like all the spreads and stuff. And like, so when I wasn't like being able to like enjoy that with my family, it, was kind of tough. So I started just like letting myself do that a little bit more and more, and realizing that that wasn't the end of the world if I ate one bagel, on a
Yeah.
Saturday. And so just little, like, how they say like small baby steps is ultimately what helps you like reach a goal. That is the kind of stuff that I was doing. It's just like little by little, like letting myself go a little bit and not being so strict and hard on myself with just everything, but especially with eating.
I see a lot of people that struggle with food, struggle with their weight, struggle with eating, and they probably wouldn't be put in the category of having like an eating disorder. But at the same time, their concepts and their feelings around food, I wouldn't say that they're a disorder, but are likely, like you said, this is a bad food. I shouldn't eat that. Like in the nutrition world and when it comes to food, I think there can be a lot of demonizing. Carbs are bad. This is bad. That diet is bad. As opposed to like food is food, and you need to have just like a healthier relationship with the idea of food. Um, and so I guess the root of the question is maybe not how do people, but the relationship that people have with food that you encounter? How do you start that process for them? So maybe not somebody with an eating disorder, but athletes that eat a certain way, or Gen Pop, where you're like, there's a weight loss, but that doesn't mean this is bad. I mean, how do you start to address the concept of how we look at food?
Yeah, I mean that it's a loaded question because like speaking to that, there's a difference between an eating disorder, which is like anorexia, bulimia, and then there's disordered eating, which like I would say a lot of
Yeah.
people have disordered eating habits or patterns, and a lot of that is because of like influence of just social media and celebrities and all of this like stuff that they're hearing and exposed to that's just like making nutrition. I mean, it makes my, it's like, man, some days I'm like, why did I choose this field? Because all I'm doing is just like debunking like just crap that people are seeing from very polarizing individuals who are usually lying to them about what works or what doesn't or whatever. So that is tough. So I mean, the thing is like I just try to educate people and try to bring it back to like the simple stuff,
Mm,
like how can we like just I don't know. It all is dependent on their goals, but there's like we could go even further back and just talk about like why everybody wants to have a smaller body, or like why people associate like health with weight loss, because you have to remember like weight loss doesn't mean gaining health, right? It means you're
yeah.
really changing your body, but you're malnourishing yourself. Like these weight loss medications are a great example of that. Sure, they're working, sure they're helping people have smaller bodies, but people are also forgetting to eat or not eating at all. So they're becoming nutrient deficient, malnourished. They're not working out. They're losing muscle mass, which is something that is like just like you need to maintain that, especially through aging. Like that is ultimately what's going to give you this high quality of life, keep you durable, resilient, and extend your lifespan. But people aren't seeing that big picture. They're just like, I just want to be small and skinny. And so that we need to fix that problem first and foremost, is like, why, do we have to like, and again, with like body positivity and having more diversity and like advertisements and clothing sizes and things like that, that is changing that. But it's like so interesting that like that's happening, but at the same time, there's like this weight loss medication craze. So you're like, what's the deal? But
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just like I just find myself having to educate people a ton, like you know, somebody wants to lose weight, like a woman, right? Like women in of middle age, maybe they're going through perimenopause. Their bodies
Mhm.
start changing because of hormone differences. It's just like that's what happens at that age. But there's things that we can do to mitigate that. But because a woman is changing their body composition, putting on a little bit more fat, maybe losing muscle, they don't feel like themselves because of all the hormone differences, but they think the solution is weight loss. And so a lot of times they think weight loss and they think ketogenic diet, right? Or high fat, low carb diet. And you're like, there's other ways to get that. Like weight loss, number one, all weight loss like diets have one thing in common, and it's that they cause a calorie deficit. It's just they do it in different ways. So you don't have to do a high fat, low carb diet to lose weight. You just have to maybe cut your calories. But in that phase of life, like you want to be building muscle. So it's a lot of it is just like
Mm.
reframing like what their goal is with like how to get them there, right? Like if they come to me wanting to lose weight and I understand like why, right? That's the biggest thing. I mean, even in strength conditioning, if somebody's coming to you with like, I want to do this workout or this thing or this is my goal, you have to understand why. Like, why do you
Yeah.
want to lose weight? Um, what will that achieve? Like, what will your life look like when you get there? And usually there's something deeper. They're like, I just don't feel like myself. I don't look like myself. I feel whatever. And so I always, within that population, am just reframing the conversation to be like, why don't we focus on building muscle and maybe changing your body composition? And that process will be a lot more fun than cutting calories and you being miserable and not being able to like enjoy holidays or weekends with your family because you're not able to eat those things or whatever. So it's probably a long-winded way of just saying like it's all just education and reframing the conversation a little bit.
Are athletes easier to work with?
No, I mean, there are people too. In that
Right.
sense, like, there are people too, they
Right.
fall into they see the same things on social media, and in that, it's almost easier to have the conversations with athletes because you're like, "Hey, like, okay, your brother who is an accountant at this firm is doing this diet and is seeing results. That's great, but, like, you're not your brother. You are an athlete. You need to perform. You need to get out there and go 7 innings in that game, like you need the energy to do that. And you're not going to be able to do that by, following this diet. So I think for an athlete, connecting it to what their motivating, thing is, it's like, okay, it's a contract year for you. You think that cutting your calories right now and sacrificing your performance is really going to help you get that big contract next year. A lot of times it clicks a little easier for them. It's a bit harder with more general population where we don't have, I have to kind of dig for what is that like ultimate motivator for them and try to connect the dots with that. So,
I think what's so cool about, I guess, the comment too, and is the Gen Pop person that feels like they should look like the athlete and feels like, okay, this is what I need. But like you just said, the athlete's a person too. They look the way this Gen Pop person wants to look, but they also have like relationships with food are complicated, and it's usually not really ever about the food so much, which
yeah,
I think is your point.
our media like demonizes food and that's what makes it, people like carbs are bad. Like that all just happened because, people are like, "Oh, my blood sugar is spiking." I'm like, "Okay, like maybe you don't want that to happen all the time because that can impact like fat and fat accumulation and the way that your hormones respond, etc." But like an athlete who has a blood sugar spike right before they're going for like a 40 sprint, a 40-yard sprint in the NFL combine, like that's good. We want that. You're going to get some benefit from that. So there, it's all relative to like what that person is doing. And the thing that I always like to say, and a lot of dietitians, I got this from other people, is like there's no such thing as a bad food unless you're allergic to it or unless it's rotten. Like everything else can fit, like it's just all in how you do it and like planning, appropriately. So
So I'm gonna need help with this, because and you just said this. I remember probably 12 years ago, I got the blood test done for food allergies, and of course, some of my favorite foods were on there. One of which are like cashews. Like I absolutely love cashews, and it was one of those things where it's like, I'm allergic to this. I probably understand that. Oh, some of these feelings probably come from the fact that I eat a ton of cashews, but I don't care. I'm gonna keep eating cashews, and to this day, like I had cashews this morning. Um, the food allergy thing. Are we talking about like serious adverse effects? Are we talking like what exactly is the food allergy?
yeah, when I say like allergic to food, I'm saying like you have
EpiPen?
anaphylactic shock, or you get rashes
Okay.
or have like severe digestive responses to eating that food, right? Like that is what I mean by allergy. Food allergy tests, like going back to your example, right? Like you still ate cashews, and how are you doing and how is your health?
I'm fine. Like that's what like yeah, I was like I
Yeah,
have to avoid
exactly.
this now.
The food allergy testing is, we're kind of learning more, or like we've learned that they're not really like a great way to assess like somebody's allergies. I actually find them more harmful than helpful. If we're talking about like the IgG, IgA, it's basically just looking at like inflammatory response to eating that food, essentially, like in
Mm.
your blood. And there's no real like correlation between that actually being an issue from like what I've read in research and what I've talked to other, dietetic professionals about. But I find them more harmful because, like, this is an example. Like, a lot of times, foods that people would eat a lot of would show up on these like food allergy tests, and they were a lot of times like healthy foods, like eggs, tree nuts,
Yeah.
whey protein, like things like that, where I'm like, these are actually like very useful, like helpful and healthy foods. And now somebody's looking at this and saying like, oh no, it's red. Like I can't eat these things at all. And that's just not the case. It's not like this means this. And so I've really gone away from even using this test or recommending people use them. And I know a lot of other dietitians have done the same. And there are tests that are getting better and better about actually like indicating that. But a lot of times it's like, you should do something that's like involves like a stool sample, or like,
Mm.
like an actual like allergen, an allergist like working with you to find out like if you truly have like an allergy to like gluten, for example, from a certain blood prick test or something like that. So yeah, it's the those like food, they're more like food intolerance tests. They're, I don't really trust in them until we get some better research on them.
You named the three foods that were red for me. It was
Yeah,
cashews, eggs, and whey protein. And I was like, that's what I eat. And I
yeah,
remember like coming home and my wife looking at me and I was like, well, then what am I going to eat now? But of course, I was like, that was 10 minutes. And I was like, I don't give a shit. Like, I will still eat this and
yeah.
maybe feel guilty, but I don't feel bad.
Yeah,
So
but
I
it's like you weren't feeling bad, right?
exactly.
Like, or you
Yeah.
don't feel bad from it. It could be other things, like maybe you just need more sleep. You don't need to avoid eating eggs, you know? So,
Right.
yeah.
So forgive me for not being like in the loop. And so I know you were at Exos. So there was a point where you transitioned, like you left Exos and you were working for the team, like you were hired by the team,
Yeah.
or what happened?
Yeah, I worked in Florida with, that crew for like 4.5 years. Then I came to headquarters and worked there for a year. I consulted with the Coyotes and the Giants during that year. And I was just doing minor league stuff with the Giants. They had like a major league dietitian. And then they opened up a position, like a full-time role for a director of nutrition. The Giants did. And it was like obviously a huge growth and financial opportunity.
Yeah.
So I went for it and I got hired. And so I was with the Giants for 4 seasons, so full time from 2019 to 2022. 2019, I was like overseeing the entire organization as the only dietitian on staff. And in 2020, I hired an assistant. And then 2020 happened. So I traveled with the team full time because I had to, because of the bubble. And then in because of that, in 2021 and 2022, I traveled full time with the major league team. I was just devoted to them. So yeah. And then I came back to Exos after the 2022 season.
Did you have to move to San Francisco?
So I lived in a hotel in San Francisco during the season.
The whole
And
time?
the whole time. Yeah. So like for this
What?
entire season, I always had my place in Arizona because the off season would happen here and like we had a
Right.
facility here.
Right.
But come when spring training ended, I took the team flight to the city and then I would stay in a hotel. But there were hotels that were like staff would stay in that would like let them keep their stuff there every
Mm.
time we went on a road trip, but I wanted to stay in a hotel closer to the ballpark just because of like late night commutes. I was like using an electric scooter to get back and forth. I didn't have a car up there. And so like I didn't want to be like riding my scooter at like, midnight after a game for a
Mm.
further hotel. So I would stay in one closer, but they made me check out every time we went on a road trip. So even if it was like a 2-day road trip, I'd have to like pack up my stuff, take it with me, come back. It was just a lot. Like all of
What?
that is like played into me not really wanting to like keep doing it. I mean, the Giants were great. They were willing to like offer me like housing and stuff like that, but I was like, I'm just done. Like
Yeah, this isn't fun anymore.
yeah, and being there through COVID, I think also kind of soured the experience too. It was just very
Yeah.
stressful and just like I don't know. I just feel like I didn't really get like the best shot at like working in Major League Baseball just because like we went through new management and then new, or like new president, had new manager. There's just like a lot of transitional stuff when I was there, and it made it like pretty stressful. So
I've heard that the travel is brutal. Aside from like just the not just the like the hotel experience that you described, how was like the travel for you?
oh man, baseball travel is tough. I mean, I hadn't done it with any other sport. I mean, I kind of like the NHL. I helped them with like their team flights a little bit when I like supported the Coyotes, but the baseball one. I mean, I remember one road trip where we changed time zones. I think like I want to say it was like 5 times in 7 days. Like
What?
we went from like Pacific to East, and then we went from like East to Central, and then we went from Central to Mountain. And I just remember that road trip was brutal. It was like we had to like make up a game that we didn't have. So it was like a 1 day in Milwaukee, and then we came back. It was just that was wild. The travel is tough. I mean, the difference between like maybe like NFL travel is like we're
Mhm.
in a city for a little bit longer. So like in some ways, for the like 2 or 3 hours I had free in the morning, I could kind of like experience the city that I was in versus like in the NFL, they're like in and out, like you don't
Yep.
really get to see like where you're at. So
Yep.
that part's nice, but yeah, I mean, it's like you travel there the night before game. Sometimes we would get somewhere at like 2 o'clock in the morning. Usually it'd be like an off day, but in some cases, like that wasn't the case. And then we'd still have to go to the ballpark. We'd have a few night games, a day game. After a day game, we'd like fly home. I remember one time we had a delay in Chicago because like something happened with our plane. We didn't actually get to San Francisco, like get back home to like, I think I remember I got back to my hotel room. It was 5:30 in the morning by the time I actually got home. And that was just like after a game in Chicago. And then we still had to, I think we had like an earlier game in San Francisco. So we still had to all get up and like go to the ballpark. It was, I mean, our staff did a good job of trying to like push the arrival times a little later, but it's like their players have to get so much done in before the actual game, like treatment, workouts, eating, etc., that it was, yeah, tough, tough, tough.
So, another like somewhat loaded question, and again, if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to. Uh, Food is everywhere, and also like I would remember when I would meet somebody, and then when they would find out what I did, they would immediately like want advice, strength and conditioning program, and that's all we talk about. And I absolutely love the field of strength and conditioning, but it doesn't mean that I wanted to talk about it all the time. But it's one of those things that's like a trigger for people, especially when you meet people that are not in the industry. Do you ever get sick of talking about nutrition?
Oh, yes. Yes. I mean, I made a joke recently that, and I do this like sometimes when I get in an Uber and, they want to have small talk and ask me what I do, I tell them I'm a geometry teacher because like I hate lying to
Brilliant.
people, but I'm like, they're not probably going to ask me a lot of questions about geometry. And if they do, like I'm screwed because I have no idea how to answer them. But because the same thing is if I tell somebody I'm a dietitian and they know what that is, or I tell them I work in nutrition, the first question is like, oh, like this is how they tell you how they eat.
Yep.
And they want you to like assess it, or you'll be like eating with them and they'll be like, oh, don't judge what I'm eating. Or like they would look at like what you're eating. And I love when they're like watching me eat, because then I'll just try to order like the most unhealthy thing in their eyes, right? Like what's unhealthy. Like I'd order like a pizza and just crush a pizza in front of them. They're like, you eat pizza? I'm like, yeah, I'm human.
Yeah,
Like I'm human and
love it.
I eat with balance. But yeah, I think even more so nowadays, I'm just so over trying to have to like fight for like truth in the world of misinformation. Like if you look at my social media, I'm always reposting people who are just like giving crap to like people who are just putting like nonsense out there and scaring people. My rule of thumb with that is anytime somebody's talking in black and whites about nutrition, like they're talking with such absolutes, that's a red flag, because nutrition's not one size fits all. And one thing that works for one person is not going to work for another. And anybody who like provides like scare tactics and what they're doing, like this food is toxic, or uses like those buzzwords like
Mhm.
don't eat this because whatever, like red flag. Those are like the big ones to just like completely avoid, because those people usually have no idea what they're talking about.
And I thought it was great because you mentioned it on social media. I recently just I like to try things. I do. I'm not dogmatic about anything, but I am like curious about many things. And one of the worlds that I am not very attuned to is the nutrition world, right? Like, so I'm a casual observer as well. And so the sodium thing came up for me, and I was like, sodium. Like, I think I get a lot of sodium. I eat cashews and salted peanuts all the time, but um, now, like, I'm not going to mention brands, but sodium based drinks because we don't get enough sodium. Is this another one of those scare tactics? Is there kind of validity to this? What's your opinion? Because I think I saw you post something recently on it, and I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, so it's so interesting because sodium has always been like demonized, because
Yeah.
it's, like associated with high blood pressure. It's salt, right? Or like sodium chloride, it's salt. And so we're talking about getting salt in the diet, which is still for most people something that they should watch, because having too much salt in your diet can cause hypertension or prehypertension, especially if for more sedentary populations who don't eat, whole foods, or like eat the most nutritious foods out there. So, and because most people eat a lot of processed food, there's going to be a lot of sodium in those foods, because sodium is what extends the shelf life. It's a preservative in a lot of
Mm,
processed food. So for most people, they probably don't need to worry about their sodium, like adding sodium to their diet, right? That really becomes a conversation in a more active population, or a population of people, just a small population, who don't eat a lot of processed foods, right? Because you're not, unless you're adding salt yourself and cooking, or to the meals themselves, you're probably not getting a whole lot. And sodium is an electrolyte. It's the main electrolyte that we lose in our sweat. And so that's why more, people who are more active, professional athletes, collegiate athletes, et cetera, high school athletes, like they're sweating a lot. So they're losing a lot of sodium in their sweat. And so they need that to replenish. So it's not like, again, not as much of a concern for a more sedentary population who eats like a typical American diet, but for people who are more active, it could be something that they want to make sure that they're getting, and mostly around their physical activity. There is kind of like, if somebody's like really staying on top of their hydration and they're drinking a lot of water, but they're going to the restroom like every hour, then that's an indicator that they're maybe not absorbing the fluids that they're consuming. So an electrolyte is going to help kind of with that absorption. It helps like pull in, the water into the cell so that you're not excreting it. So that would be a case where an electrolyte would be good. But it scares me that people are taking some of these like electrolyte powders that have like over 1,000
yeah.
grams of sodium. One brand in particular, it's very popular. I don't think most of the general population needs that. I think it's like 2,300 milligrams or less a day is what is a good enough amount to not put you at risk for having high blood pressure or any other sort of like at risk for stroke, etc. But like, yeah, if you're getting 1,000 milligrams in this packet and just having that all day and eating a typical American diet and you're not super active or you're losing water in your sweat, yeah, that can be a little tough. So yeah.
All right, so switching gears just a little bit. Outside of nutrition, like what are you really excited about these days?
Ooh, well, I just hiked the Grand Canyon
Oh.
for my first time. I just did rim to river, so it was like 18 miles. And so I'm really into just like trying to make big goals for myself. Like I felt so accomplished finishing that, and I haven't trained for something or done something like that in such a long time. So I'm shifting gears into maybe trying to look at some running goals. Running is like my Mount Everest. Like it's like
Mm-hmm.
my body, I'm not built as a runner. I'm built like a power lifter. So that is a huge challenge for me. So it's something I want to achieve. And I'm looking at maybe doing like a 10K or even a half marathon, but we'll see. I sprained my ankle really bad like a month ago, and I'm still kind of working up to like full range of motion. So we'll see where I go with that. But that's something I've been really into, is just like physical goals of mine.
I don't know if you were in the office. You were in the office that day. I don't know if we spoke about it, but I also like running is not my thing. I would get like my running playing football. So like you played soccer, you get your
Yeah,
running that way. The concept,
that's why I do it.
right? Yeah, the concept of like putting on a pair of running shoes and like just going for a run. I was like, there's no chance ever that this is happening. And then like post pandemic and like life kind of changes more recently, I was like, you know what, I need to find other ways to add fitness in. And so I started running, and like I'm on Strava or whatever. And when I say I go running, like I run around my block,
Yeah.
right? Like there's nothing intense. And one of the people that I love him to death, he's one of my favorite people on the planet, and like the first person to give me kudos on Strava was Tristan Rice. And
Mhm.
I remember catching up with Tristan. He was like, I see that you're running, man. And I was like, Tristan, like I know what you consider running. Like, please. Tristan, for those that don't know, is an ultra marathon runner at this stage. And so I just found it funny because yeah, my first goal is to run a 5K. And like it's interesting, like that's what I want to do. Like that's my first big goal,
Mhm.
which is not that big objectively, but like for me will be a huge feat. I hear about people running and hiking the Grand Canyon too. So the fact that you did that, I think, is awesome. As an experience, what was that like doing it?
Well, I went with Tristan,
Oh,
so
there you go.
he's
Of
like a
course.
he's like a Grand Canyon guru, but,
Of course.
it was just, like, I went there, I visited with my mom, when she was visiting, and she'd never been to the Grand Canyon, so of course, like, I had to take her there. And I was just like standing there looking down on it. And it was something I was supposed to be doing last year. Some stuff happened, so I wasn't able to do it, but I hadn't been training for it or anything like that, like getting ready in any way. So I just remember standing there looking down. I'm like, you know what? I want to see the river. I want to see the Colorado River, like,
Mm.
in there at the bottom of the canyon. I want to earn that view. And Tristan always talked about like just the feeling of like, when you get out of the canyon after just like being in there, how it's just like unlike any other thing. And so it's like, I want to experience that. And again, I'm not like I haven't done a lot of like tough physical feats in my life, and so I was like, let me just try this out and like see if I can do it and challenge myself. So going, and I did it on a really bad sprained ankle too, mind you. Like I had like sprained my ankle playing indoor soccer 20 days before we were meant to go.
Jeez.
And so I was like pretty scared about that. But yeah, I mean, it was just like amazing. It was just like, it's hiking, so it's not that bad. What really you have to keep up with is just like being able to like be on your legs for that long and then getting out. The one thing about the canyon that's so crazy, it's so hard to train for because as Tristan puts it, it's an upside down mountain. So it's
Yeah.
really hard. Like in Arizona, we have so many places to go hiking and stuff. And I would, go up and down mountains all the time. But it's different when you start going down and end going up, and
Right.
I found that so difficult, and it's so steep coming out that last like 4.5 miles. Like I hit a wall at one point. It was pretty difficult, but there's no other way out other than to go up.
Yeah.
So,
Got no choice.
like it was the one time where I really had to dig deep and be like, okay, like I can do this. Like I'm physically able to do this. I might be in pain, and I might go slow, but like I can do it. And just like I've never really put myself in that mindset before, and so I was like, okay, if I can do this, then I feel like I can dig deep and do other things too. And yeah, so that's my whole thing, is just trying to dig deep and challenge myself, because it's easy to live in your comfort zone, and so my goals right now are just to like get out of that a little bit.
That's awesome. How long did it take you?
So we did 18 miles, and it took just under 12 hours. I was hoping to make it in
Oh,
like 10, but it was really hot too. Like it was over 100 degrees when we were coming out of the canyon. So like when we were at the bottom of the canyon, it was 100 degrees. It was straight sun on us, like the hottest part of the day. And so the heat was really a struggle for me. And so it was a lot slower than I had expected, but yeah. And it was yeah, just it was long.
all right. Listening to music, talking, like your tough place. How was it just like, I've got to sit with this, or do you have like ways of dealing with that? Like,
When you're like digging deep.
yeah, like how
Honestly,
do
like
you do it?
having the group that I had with me. I had
Yeah,
a friend of mine, and then a friend of mine from like that I knew from high school, who just like randomly joined. He joined our group like 4 weeks before. So like between Tristan and them two just like
yeah,
encouraging me. Honestly, like I'll be so transparent. I had a fueling issue with it. Like my issue was that I was like, I relied on my like expertise and intuition too much. Going down was super easy. It was like 7 miles to get down to the bottom. And we were doing it at sunrise. So it was beautiful. Like the views were beautiful. And so I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna like eat when I feel like I need to eat. And like I didn't think about how I had trekking poles. Like I had poles because of my ankle. So like I had the poles. I didn't have a watch on me to keep track of time. I had a goal of eating like 60 grams of carbs per hour. And I got so immersed in like the views and, a new experience, and that I didn't think about that. And so I wasn't staying ahead of fueling. And so when we got to the bottom of the canyon, it was so hot, and I got a frozen Snickers bar and a iced coffee, which just sounded so good to me. And that's all I had. I had that and like a few energy chews like that whole time. And as soon as we started going up, because I hadn't stayed on top of my hydration, I had PB and J's, I had all the or my nutrition, I had PB and J's and all this stuff, and I just didn't eat them because I was like, oh, I feel fine.
yeah.
I got to a point as we were like kind of in the halfway going up part where I just completely hit a wall, and I was having digestive issues because I didn't eat enough. And
Right.
so Tristan was like forcing me to eat, and I was like, and I had to force myself. So we sat there for a while, dipping in like creeks and pouring water over our heads and just like resting in some shade before we like started the really hard part to get out. And I just like forced myself to eat, and it was just like them encouraging me and me just being like, man, I'm the worst sports dietitian ever right now. Like I actually said those words, but I think it was the first time I actually experienced like what my athletes experience, and I was like, dang, I wish I would have done this more, put myself in their shoes
Yeah.
mentally, because it is much harder doing it than actually just telling them to do it. So yeah, I think just having them there, and just I really also just started like I could get into like some negative self-talk. So I started trying to remind myself, like, you can do it. You've been training for this. Like, you know what you're doing. You're not going to die, and like getting into some more positive self-talk also was a strategy that I used that helped. So,
I love it. It's awesome. Um, okay, so there's one really like canned question that I have. There's some questions that repeat themselves, but there's one where it's like I ask this one to everybody, and it's the resource question. And essentially, it doesn't have to be a book. It doesn't have to be anything. It's actually really just like what you would suggest. So it could be a podcast. It could be something you're listening to. It could be something that you really like. It could be an app. It can be a conference. It can be anything. if I were to just be like, Leron, what were 3 things that either really helped you or that you would just suggest to me or anybody else? Just asking you, like, what are 3 things where you'd be like, hey, check this out, or read this, or this really helped me?
Yeah, and the first thing I can think of, 'cause man, there's like so much stuff out there that I've used or want to use, is learning about just like psychology of people, like I think about
Mm,
like motivational interviewing techniques or just like helping people with behavior change. Because in any profession where you work in service of helping people, you have to understand like where they're coming from, like their background. You have to understand how to ask the right questions and, like build a relationship with them that they can trust you and they share more and divulge more. Like those are things I wish I would have done a lot more earlier in my career and learned more about and put into practice more, and things that I still find myself like reading and learning about. So that would be one, is just anything around like just psychology or, behavior change. um, the second one, probably more so like a recent thing that I've kind of like done in my work, with Exos, but also just like personally diving into, is just like anything women's health related.
mm,
Because there's just not a lot out there. And like when, now this is becoming a really hot topic, which is like kind of crazy because like women have been here forever. It's kind of wild that we've never, that only
I've
now
just been
we're
here.
like, oh, we need more research on women. But like we all wouldn't be here without women. But
Yeah.
the what's it's more just like, like learning about like my own physiology and just like how I respond, and the fact that like, there's things that are going to be inevitable that I'm going to go through as a woman, like menopause, perimenopause. Like it's, as we say in like our papers, is like it's inevitable. Like every woman is going to experience that, and being prepared and educated on that is huge. And I wish when I was younger or early in my career I learned more about like just women's health and women's nutrition, even though there wasn't a ton out there. Like there's still probably some, because I always worked with males in my career, and I always got all of my education in service of being able to like serve them and not serve myself.
Mm,
So that would be one thing. And then I guess the third thing, kind of along the same lines, is just, yeah, like learning how to help myself. Because, as we like to say, like put the mask on the airplane on yourself or
yeah.
the other person. Because if you can't help yourself and you're not in a good mental state or you're not in a good place, then it's going to be really hard to like truly help others. And so anything, like whether it's like self-help books or podcasts or therapy or just something that can help you be like secure in yourself so that you can really serve others optimally. Those would be the top three. They're a little vague, but
No, and I was gonna say, no, not vague. Well, vague, but still like really appropriate because I think the 3 that you mentioned are like, I mean, like they kind of hit home for me. Um, People taking care of themselves and asking them like really, really hard questions, but then also like acting upon them in some way, shape, or form. Like I think everybody like knows, oh, I've got to work on myself. I've got to take care of myself. But like the real work, for lack of a better word, is really hard to do. But like needs to be done. And the effect that it has on everybody around you that you may not even know, like inadvertently happens or like indirectly and definitely unintentionally, but still does happen, like is huge. So no, I think it's a huge point to make because it's very easy to think about servicing and helping other people, because then it takes away from you having to worry about yourself, which is like where the hard stuff happens.